Hello, my name is Jeff Head, and I'm making this video today because I wanted to talk a little bit about the conditions in our country and this election that we have coming up. Now, most folks know me, who do know me, outside of my family and friends, because I've got a YouTube channel on military models that I build. It's a hobby of mine. I was an engineer during my career and really enjoyed it. And the last 16 of those years I worked for the United States government as a designer of security systems and then as a security officer for our area. And in doing that I took an oath to the U.S. Constitution, but more on that later. I was raised down in Texas on a small ranch during the 50s and 60s, and then graduated high school in the 70s. And in fact, started my high school experience not long after segregation was abolished. Now, I was taught by my parents, who were good Christian people, that, and quite frankly, my dad showed me in the Constitution and, of course, in the Declaration of Independence, where in our form of government, all are treated equal, all are created equal by their Creator, who is God in heaven, our Father in heaven. And that I should always keep that in mind when I went to school. And I did. I played football in Denton, Texas, for Denton High School. And I had a brother who was a year older. God rest his soul. He died back in 2004. From lymphoma. But we had and developed many good friends who played with us on the football team who were black Americans. In fact, we had an old beat-up pickup truck that we used on our ranch that we would take to school, and then we would use that to give rides to our friends who had missed the bus that would take them to where they lived on the other side of town. And usually we'd have 6 or 8 colored guys in the bus with us, and we'd joke, we'd stop, get drinks, we'd have a good time. And to this day, some of those people are good friends of mine. I consider them such, and they consider me such. And you know what? When I took them home, they had good families to go home to. They had a mom and a dad. They went to church on Sundays. It was, just like my family, from what I could tell. And we had a good time with them. And that was the way I grew up. This idea that all people, particularly white people, are racist is just not true. I saw very little of that as I grew up. In fact, most people and their parents were good Christians and believed the same way I did. I'm not going to say there wasn't any of it, because there was. But the majority of people didn't believe that way. And I'll tell you another important fact, and you can look at the history, look at the records, and you'll find it's true. Do you know, during the Civil War, half of my family was from the South. Some of them fought in the Civil War on the side of the South, but none of them had slaves. And they weren't fighting for slavery. They were fighting for their states' rights. And I personally believe, particularly in retrospect, but I'm hoping that I would have believed it anyway, that the Union of the United States of America had to hold. And to begin with, many of the Northerners fought for that reason. Certainly, Abraham Lincoln believed that the Union had to hold. That was the principal reason, and you can read it from his own words. But he also freed the slaves. And guess what? He was a Republican. First Republican president ever. That's something important to remember, because there are people who today would ignore that history. Then later in the 60s, I witnessed it. Segregation, Jim Crow laws, the KKK, all of that existed. But the people who voted with LBJ to put in effect the Segregation Act, the equal rights that were established and what he said was going to be the Great Society. Didn't turn out that way. But the people that voted for that, by far and away the majority, were Republicans, more than 90%. And more than 90% of the Democrats voted against it, including a few of the ones that we still have in power. And in fact, Hillary Clinton and many of the leaders that we see today, Pelosi and others, one in particular that they kind of lionize was a man who was the longest sitting senator, and before that he was a long sitting representative. So he was in the House of Representatives and then the Senate, was a man named Senator Byrd. And he had been, and everybody knew this, he had been a member of the KKK. And yet they still lionized him as if though he was something great. He and all his colleagues voted against segregation and voted against the ending of Jim Crow. Now that's a history that they don't tell today, and it's because we have a press that is so one-sided in its reporting that they're not really journalists anymore. A journalist is supposed to look at things even-handedly and report them so, but they don't. They've taken a side, and so they're not really what the founders envisioned as the free press. But anyway, that's something important to remember as we talk and when we look at the situation around us. Because today we have a situation where things are so polarized and where so many things are said about whole classes of people that if you will apply critical thinking, they can't be true. The white population of this country is not racist. There are some who are, but there are some blacks who are racist too. That doesn't make all blacks bad by any stretch of the imagination. As I said, I have many very close friends who I trust my life and the life of my family with who are black, but who are good Americans, God-fearing, Constitution-loving Americans. I would suggest that each of you get out the Declaration of Independence and get out the U.S. Constitution and read it. I did when I was taking the oath that I needed to take to protect and defend the Constitution. And then very, very importantly, there's one phrase in there that says, and bear true allegiance and faith to the same. I figured I couldn't bear true faith and allegiance to something I had never read, although I had read it. And I believed that I couldn't truly defend something from all enemies, foreign and domestic enemies of the Constitution. I couldn't defend them. I couldn't take that oath unless I renewed my knowledge of it, so I read it. And I'm grateful that I did, because it's fairly plain to understand. And we are hearing today calls to end the Constitution, to go absolutely against it and turn this country into a Marxist, socialist country, which it was never designed to be. John Adams said that the Constitution that he helped write and he helped create was created for a moral and a religious people only. Why? Because the amount of freedom that was being given allowed people to live their lives as they wished. And they had faith that the majority of Americans would be good people, honorable, truthful, who would love the Constitution and would realize what they had been blessed with. And I will tell you this, I have watched as my friends who are black have done very well for themselves. They moved out of the ghettos, the housing projects that had been created for them by the Democrats. And I view those places as nothing more than modern-day economic reservations. And so many people get caught up in them. And when they do, they end up losing their families, losing their ability and their desire to do better for themselves, which the Constitution is all about. It's all about making an environment so people can better themselves. It's not about equal outcomes, because outcomes are dependent on how you do and what you do. How truthful are you? How hardworking are you? What type of goals do you have in your life? That's what America is all about. And so I would urge you folks who are watching this, rather than just get angry, to read these things and test the words that I'm giving you. Sadly, the Democratic Party, who voted for all of those changes, who voted against all of those changes, have continued to not make life better for the blacks. Any demographic look shows that even since the 60s, the demographics of the black folks in this country has gone down. Why? I don't believe it's an accident. The Democrats want a group of people that they're guaranteed to get votes for. So they promise every election cycle, they promise all sorts of things that somehow never come to pass. And the folks who live in those cities know that this is true. Some of them are speaking out against it now in greater numbers than ever. And that's just the truth of the matter. You can look at the U.S. government statistics and other statistics that come from higher education and see that what I am saying is true. And trillions of dollars have been spent, and nothing has been bettered. Instead, you have Democratic politicians and some of the folks like Jackson and the other reverend who are getting rich while their people languish. Something that happened here recently, though, is we had a guy who wasn't a politician by trade and who didn't have an attitude that everybody thought a politician ought to have, got elected as president. But he was a good businessman, and he took an economic condition and he turned it around in 3 years. And in those 3 years, he created an environment where all people, including particularly blacks and Hispanics, were having record high employment participation rates, record high salaries. He made a difference, and that difference is based on the free market. And of course, if you use the free market and you use your God-given talents and your desire to work hard, you will do well. I'm not rich by any means, but I have a family with 5 kids and 15 grandkids. Even though I'm terminally ill with bone cancer, the Lord's blessed me because they thought 4 years ago I had 2 months to live. It's 4 years later, and I'm still chugging, but it's not because of me. It's because of God in heaven. And I count it to Him, and I thank Him, and I'm grateful for His love, and particularly the love of my Savior, Jesus Christ. So I want you to know that the Marxism that's being preached, particularly by Black Lives Matter, the Democrats have always been very good at this, coming up with catchy phrases that you can't disagree with, but then those organizations go about doing something that's completely different than what the catching phrase would imagine. If you read on their own site and if you read their history, they proudly say they're Marxists. And during the 1900s, every Marxist society since Karl Marx, who was the originator and from whom communism spread, every society that has tried it has ended up doing one of two things. They've either gone bankrupt or they have ended up committing genocide. Hundreds of millions of people were killed during the 1900s by such governments. And guess what country fought them down? The United States of America. And when we defeated the countries like Hitler's Germany and Tito's Japan or the Emperor's Japan, we didn't take those countries. We didn't make them the 51st and 52nd state. Instead, as good Christians, we helped them. We kept them from starving. We helped them rebuild. And now they are free countries. And their people are benefiting from the free market. And that is a good thing. I trust that you all will listen to this. And I'll give you a couple of things that maybe you could read that would help you if you're interested. If you want to know how the good Lord helped us during World War II because it was not a war like we have fought since the Korean War, where our technology and our numbers were so overpowering. There was real reason to believe that we were in danger of being defeated. And my dad fought in that war. He joined up into the reserves, or into the what is it called, the officer reserve course. He was in college in Alabama, and he joined when he was 17 with the officers training stuff at school, and they had him there in Alabama. And in 1943, early on, they transferred him to Rice University in Texas, and by the middle of that year, he was an ensign, and they shipped him out, and he was to war. And he told us on occasion about it, particularly the Japanese, because he fought in the Pacific. As an ensign, he started off as a navigator for a flotilla of landing craft, and then when he became a lieutenant, first lieutenant, he became the commander of a landing craft, and he was that for the rest of the war. And he told us that it wasn't a sure thing, that the people we were fighting, although their ideology was evil and was extremely racist, they were hard fighters. But we ended up defeating them. And you read about it. So this book is called The Two Ocean War by Samuel Eliot. Read that book. And see how unbelievably miraculous things happened that allowed us to win. Same thing happened during the Revolutionary War and other wars that we have fought. I believe that's because God wanted the United States to be free and wanted it to be powerful so that it could be a base for Christianity to spread around the world. You may disagree with me, and that's fine. You're free to do that. But you read that book and see if those types of miracles did not occur. I'll tell you another great book to read, and it's by a friend of mine, a guy named Larry Schweikart, who's a professor in Ohio. He wrote a book called A Patriot's History of the United States of America. It's a big, thick book, and most of the charter schools and many of the private universities have taken it up for history, to teach American history. They taught me American history when I was in high school, and it was good. It wasn't slanted. It was just the up-and-up history of the United States. Were we perfect? Absolutely not. Nothing man-made is perfect. But our founders, I believe, were guided by God, and they put in there a way for our government to fix problems as we noticed them. With slavery, we had to fight a war. And 1 million people died during that war. Many, many of them Northerners who wanted to free the slaves. I don't hear anybody calling for them to get reparations. And I don't think they want them. They did what was right. And I think that should be the same thing all around. But the war was fought. Slavery was ended. Then later, after Reconstruction, which was a very difficult time for the South, there were people in the South who reacted badly and treated the black people, still amongst them, badly. And it was wrong. My dad taught me it was wrong. And I believed it was wrong. And I saw that change. But I'll tell you, like I said, I saw that it was the Republican Party that voted for it. And these are things that all Americans should know. And they should take these things into account when they vote. Black Lives Matter is a true statement. All lives matter. All people are children of God. All people deserve to be free and have a right to freedom and have a right to the pursuit of freedom and a pursuit of happiness. And that's a good thing as long as they don't kill or injure or practice discrimination against other people. Martin Luther King taught that people should be judged by their character, not by the color of their skin. And yet today, we have people who would tell us that because we're white, we're bad, just for that reason, though we had nothing to do with that. And then they come up with this, I'm sorry, I'll just use the old farm language that I was taught, that this hogwash that, well, simply because we were born white, we have these inlaid white racist feelings, which is simply not true. I knew my great-grandmother. I knew my grandmother, the ones from the South, and they were good Christian people. And they loved many, many people who were different color skins than they had. And they didn't love them as a pet or something different than them. They loved them as they loved their own. And so this idea that someone is different just because they're a different color goes against the very things one of the heroes of our country who taught during that period that people should be judged by their character is being mocked now. And so even though Black Lives Matter has a good slogan, they teach out in the open now that our country must change. In fact, I've heard their leaders say, if we don't get what we want, we're going to burn it down. We're going to burn everything down. See, to me, that goes beyond not liking whites. That is something that is disloyal to this country, and I would view as treason. If you want to burn down the country as it was established and as the laws have been written, then you're committing a terrible act against the country. You should go live somewhere else, or read those books that I told you about, because you've been deceived. And the party that's deceiving you is now whole hog going hand in hand with this far left Green Deal that would bankrupt this country and set us up as a third world country, which we're not. And people come here by the millions and try to get here, even illegally if they can, because they view America as a great hope. I know Muslims, I know Spanish, I know Black Americans, all who feel this way. I've been in the hospitals, and we couldn't afford a big apartment over there in near MD Anderson, where I had to go to get my operation. So we were in a Lutheran help house, and most of the folks that were there with us were Black, and we loved those people. We loved them like we loved ourselves, and they were good, good people. And we would have prayers together, and we would sing together there at that church apartment complex that they, thank God, put aside for people who couldn't afford the bigger apartments or hotels around MD Anderson. So please read those books. Please open your heart. And I would tell every American who loves this country, vote and choose to vote for the people who can continue the good traditions that we have as a nation, that has been the nation that has provided the most prosperity and the most freedom and rebuilt countries that we had to defeat. There's no other nation or empire, which the United States certainly isn't, because it didn't keep other people's country land during those wars. Please, please stand up, speak out, and remember the history of this nation. And if you will read it, yes, we had mistakes. We made mistakes with the Indians, but the Indians also made mistakes against us. It was a horrible fight with them between two cultures that, as they sat, were not compatible. And I believe that this nation being formed and arising to what it became to provide then in turn freedom and opportunities for all of those people. Had a good friend in the Bureau of Reclamation who was a full-blooded Blackfoot, and he left the reservation because he realized that he could go to school and become an engineer, which he did, and then get better jobs as a result of it, which he also did. And so this promise for freedom is open to all, and all you have to do is stand up, get away from the environments that have been artificially created, which are nothing more than reservations, and work hard. And I would also say believe in God and seek His mercy. And you will find that this country is good and providing. and will allow you to become much more than you ever thought was possible. I hope you'll do this. I'm sure I'm going to get some pretty nasty comments on this video, but I had to put it out there because America is a nation that was founded on godly principles. Haven't always been true to them, but we have made up for it over time as we could, and we did. And I'll tell you this, up until about 2008, things had gotten much better. But then we had a president who didn't like America, who preached the same things that are being preached now, and things went very wrong. And hatred was stoked, and it's burning, and we need to put it out. The best way to put it out, short of warfare, which none of us want, but which we will do if forced, the best way to put it out is through the love of God in heaven and Jesus Christ and the truth. The things I've been speaking about are true. I hope you'll look into them. Thanks for listening. Again, this is Jeff Head. I try not to do anything like this very often, but I had to do this. I had to do it because the nation, for my friends and their children and grandchildren, and for my own children and grandchildren, is at risk. And I want them to have the opportunities I have had and that my good Black and Spanish and other friends have had. They deserve that, and their families deserve it. And I leave that with you now, and thank you for listening. Goodbye.